Spot the errors. Spotting errors is a common test and forms a part of almost all the important examinations. It requires an awareness of the basic rules of grammar, that is, parts of speech, noun, pronoun, adjective, adverb, preposition, subject-verb agreement, form of tense, use of articles, and certain exceptional usages must be clear when dealing with spot the errors. This video is to make the listeners to know the correct usage of English. By spotting the errors and correcting them, one can speak or write English without mistakes. In this video, we can see the errors in preposition. In the left side, we have incorrect sentence, and in the right side, we have correct sentence. See the first sentence. My children go to school by foot. By foot is given here. When we refer transport, we can use by. Here foot is given, so it's wrong. Instead of foot, if we have bus, this sentence is correct. My children go to school by bus means it's correct. My children go to school on foot is correct here. On is usually used for actions involving body parts. Foot is here, so we must use on. She called at her friend. Called at is here. We use called at to represent a place. She called on her friend is correct. When we have friend, we must use the preposition on, called on her friend. He congratulated me for winning the election. Congratulated me for winning is given here. We must use the preposition on instead of for. He congratulated me on winning the election. She kept the book in the table. She kept the book on the table is correct. Instead of in, we must use the preposition on. On refers to a preposition that expresses a situation when something is positioned above something else. I visited a website in the internet. Instead of in, we must use the preposition on. I visited a website on the internet is correct. She prefers coffee than tea. Some comparative adjectives like superior, junior, prior, anterior, posterior, prefer should be followed by to instead of than. Instead of than, we must use to. She prefers coffee to tea. Moving on to the next sentence, he lives at Chennai. At Chennai is given here. We use at for specific places. That is, like market, we must use at. But Chennai is a metropolitan city, so we must use in. He lives in Chennai. Use in for land areas, that is, for larger places like towns, countries, and continents. Have trust on God and everything will be right. Instead of on, we must use in. Have trust in God and everything will be right. Moving on to the next sentence. On every Sunday, I play cricket in the afternoon. The use of on is not appropriate here. So, every Sunday I play cricket in the afternoon is correct. He is confident on his success. It refers to a general effort. That's why he is confident of his success is right. The boss had full confidence on his manager for successful completion of the project. Here, the boss had full confidence in his manager. He had full trust in his manager. So, the boss had full confidence in his manager for successful completion of the project is right. I prefer to travel in train. For means of transport, use by. Here we have train, so we must use by. I prefer to travel by train is right. Brutus stabbed Caesar by a dagger. Raj killed a snake by a stick. In both the sentences, we have by. We use by before an agent in passive voice or to show how someone does something. Here we have the objects dagger and stick. We can consider them as tool or object. We use with to show the tool or object used to do something. So instead of by, we must use with. Brutus stabbed Caesar with a dagger. Raj killed a snake with a stick. Next sentence, I provided him money. See, with something he has to be provided. In this sentence, he provided him with money. So, I provided him with money is correct. She aimed at doing well in the exam. She is singular, so we must use singular verb. Aim is plural verb. Aims is singular verb. So, she aims at doing well in the exam is correct. The patient is now free of danger. When we see this free of danger, from must come to our mind. Free from danger, free from risk, free from disease, free from injury, or correct. The patient is now free from danger is right. We reach at the place very late. Here, there is no necessity for this preposition at. She reached the place very late is correct. Despite of the great weather, I was not able to go for a bike ride. In spite of and despite are prepositional expressions. In spite of and despite have a similar meaning to although or even though. They express a contrast between two things. Here, instead of despite of, we can use despite or in spite of. This despite won't come with of. In spite must be used with of. This is the difference between in spite of and despite. When we use despite, we must use despite only. When we write in spite, we must use of also. We must add of also, in spite of. Here, despite is correct. In spite of or despite the great weather, I was not able to go for a bike ride. She is angry at her husband. Instead of this preposition at, we must use the preposition with. She is angry with her husband. Now we can see three sentences without preposition. He closely resembles with his father. Rajesh went to abroad. Kumar told to his sister that he was all right. What's the error? Yes, it's obvious. He closely resembles his father. Rajesh went abroad. Kumar told his sister that he was all right. Without the preposition itself, the sentence gives full meaning and it's correct also. Rajesh went abroad. Kumar told his sister that he was all right. I never do any work behind 10 p.m. Behind is used before place. Here we have time. So this is wrong. The sentence is wrong. I never do any work after 10 p.m. is correct. After is used before time. After or before also can be used. So instead of behind, we must use after. I can speak French beside English. Beside means by the side of. This sentence is wrong. Instead of beside, we must use besides. Besides means in addition to or also. The meaning of this sentence is, in addition to English, I can speak French also. As you know by my visiting card, I am now in Mumbai. Instead of by, we must use the preposition from. As you know from my visiting card, I am now in Mumbai. After the complicated surgery, the patient hoped of complete recovery. Instead of, we must use for. After the complicated surgery, the patient hoped for complete recovery. The new healthcare scheme announced by the government will bring relief to the children suffering with acute tuberculosis. So when we see the word suffering, automatically we will write from, suffering from. The new healthcare scheme announced by the government will bring relief to the children suffering from acute tuberculosis. The guests enter into the room. The police are investigating into the case. He entered into my room when I was away. The first sentence and in the last sentence we have enter. Enter means to go somewhere and it denotes motion. So into is superfluous. Into is not necessary. Without into itself, the sentence is or correct. The guest entered the room. He entered my room when I was away, or correct. The police are investigating into the case. The sentence gives full meaning without this preposition into. The police are investigating the case is correct. He had been working for the firm since almost 20 years. We have been waiting for you since 2 hours. Here the preposition since is used. We use since to denote a point of time. Here 20 years and 2 hours is given. This is a period of time or duration. So instead of since, we must use the preposition for. He had been working for the firm for almost 20 years. We have been waiting for you for 2 hours is correct. But if the sentence is like this, we must use since. We have been waiting for you since 5 o'clock because this 5 o'clock represents time. So we have been waiting for you since 5 o'clock is correct. See the next sentence. He worked since morning to evening. Instead of since, we must use from. He worked from morning to evening. If we use for here, it's wrong. He worked for morning to evening is wrong. He worked from morning to evening is correct. This from also indicates duration. From morning to evening, he worked. Divide this apple among Robert and David. Here, the comparison is between two persons. When comparing two persons or two things, we can use the preposition between. More than two means we must use among. Here, in this sentence, the comparison is between two persons, so between is used here. Divide this apple between Robert and David. In the last sentence also, we are comparing Ram and Ali. So, between is used here. There is no enmity among Ram and Ali is wrong. There is no enmity between Ram and Ali is correct. See this sentence. Divide this apple between the girls. Girls. So, there are many girls. So when we are comparing more than two persons or things, we must use the preposition among. Divide this apple among the girls is correct. On, in and at are not used before today, tomorrow, yesterday, following day and next day is a rule. We will do homework in tomorrow. We went to school on yesterday. In these sentences, we have yesterday and tomorrow. We must not use the preposition on and in before tomorrow and yesterday. We will do homework tomorrow. We went to school yesterday. If a principal verb is used after, in, about, after, at, before, for, from, to, that verb must be in ing form as a rule. See the sentences. You prevented me from eating it. We went back home after play in the garden. Eat and play are the principal verbs. These principal verbs comes after, from and after. See the rule. If a principal verb is used after, from and after, that verb must be in ing form. Eat is a verb, play is a verb in these sentences. So this eat and play must take ing form. You prevented me from eating it is correct. We went back home after playing in the garden. The subjective case of noun or pronoun is used after preposition. We must not depend on he. We went and spoke to they. See, after this preposition on and to, we must use the subjective case of noun or pronoun. Here we have he and they. Instead of he, we must use the subjective case of he. Him is the subjective case of he. We must not depend on him. We went and spoke to them. Them is the subjective case of they. Transitive verbs like discuss, describe, reach, order, tell, demand, attack, resemble, ridicule, etc. are not followed by a preposition. See the sentences. They described about the scenery. Please discuss about the matter. Describe about your friend. They all met in a room to discuss about the plan to action. See, in all these sentences, we have described, describe, discuss, discuss. So, after these transitive verbs, we must not use a preposition about. They describe the scenery. Please discuss the matter. Describe your friend. They all met in a room to discuss the plan to action. See the rule. Verbs like say, suggest, propose, speak, reply, explain, talk, listen, write are followed by preposition to if there is a person in form of object. See the sentences. They did not reply me. On Independence Day, we listened the Prime Minister's speech. Here we have me and Prime Minister as objects. See, they are persons in the form of objects. So we must use the preposition to after this reply and listen. They did not reply to me. After reply, we have to use the preposition to. On Independence Day, we listened to the Prime Minister's speech. After listen, we must use the preposition to. Moving on to the next rule, the prepositions used after two words must be distinct if the words are joined by an or are. He is careful and particular about his work. Here we have two words, careful and particular, and these two words were joined by and. So these two words must be followed by two prepositions. Already we have about as preposition for particular, and we must use one more preposition for careful. So he is careful in and particular about his work. For careful, we are using in and for particular we are using about as prepositions. The concert had already started when we arrived in the venue. We must use arrive at to denote specific place. For example, venue, station, etc. The concert had already started when we arrived at the venue is correct. We can use arrive in for cities and for countries. A team arrived in England a few hours ago. Next sentence, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan live at New York. When we see the words live, work, study, we must use in. For permanent situations, we must use the preposition in. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan live in New York. For the words morning, afternoon, evening, we use the preposition in the. For example, don't go out in the afternoon. It's very hot. This sentence is correct because it denotes a period of time. But for night, we use the preposition at. See the sentence, don't go out in the night is wrong. Instead of in the, we must use the preposition at. Don't go out at night. Because night is viewed as a block of time rather than a period of time. Usually we sleep at night. So for night, we use the preposition at. Words commonly used together is called as collocation. That is, two words go together. See, capable of, pleased with, apparent to, prior to, proud of, akin to, or collocation words. Such natural imagery suggests that the killings were akin with the natural disaster. This akin always goes with the preposition to only. So, such natural imagery suggests that the killings were akin to a natural disaster is correct. The rule is, for past, we must use ago and not before. I met Scott for the first time in Geneva 10 years before. The meeting took place before 10 years, so we must use ago instead of before. I met Scott for the first time in Geneva 10 years ago. We must follow the same rule in these sentences also. 10 years before, 10 months before, a few weeks before, 5 minutes before. Instead of before, we must use ago. 10 years ago, 10 months ago, a few weeks ago, 5 minutes ago. For past actions, we must use ago instead of before. Most of people have a computer at home these days. Find out the error. The error is obvious. See, most people have a computer at home these days. When we talk generally, we must use most people only. Most people have a computer at home these days. When we talk about specific group, we must use most of the. See the example, most of the students in my class passed the exam. Here we are talking about specific group. We are talking about a class, so we are using most of the students. So I hope it's clear. Thank you. Thank you for watching.